Hello and welcome to this video. I've actually teamed up with Christopher Carvalho from Unlock Your Sound, and we're going to be showing you how you can master with compression with Logic Pro 10's compressor. So this is actually part of our compressor series from our mastering course. If you'd like full access to our mastering course, if you check the link below, you can get this course for only $10. Full price, it is $120. So let's get into the video and look at mastering with compression with Logic Pro 10's compressor.
Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about compression. In this video, I'm going to use Logic's compressor, which is a very capable, very versatile compressor, and will fulfill all of the compression needs that you need in mastering. First of all, I'd like to make clear where in the chain the compressor should generally go. So as you can see here on my track inspector, I've got a gain utility, a EQ, and then a compressor. That is generally speaking the order in which I have those plugins if I use them in mastering. The reason for the initial gain is to increase or decrease the headroom that I might deem necessary when using compression. The EQ is because generally I want to balance the frequencies in the sound first before I compress it. And sometimes I might even use an EQ after compression to slightly adjust the way the compressor colored the sound. But generally, I would definitely have one before, because if the EQ is unbalanced, I can't really expect the compressor to behave in the way that I expect it to. Now, I've looped a reasonably loud part of Tomas's mix to demonstrate the compressor. So I'm just going to hit play, and we're going to have a look at what it's doing, and then I'm going to talk you through the different parameters that are on the compressor, such as threshold, ratio, makeup gain, etc. Okay, so the first thing that you see here on the compressor is this needle. Now, this needle, what this represents is the amount of gain reduction that's happening. A compressor is practically just turning down or turning up the signal as it comes in. So the amount of gain reduction is just how much it's turning the signal down by, which brings me on to threshold. So the threshold is the level at which, when the audio exceeds it, gain reduction occurs. So for example, for every decibel above the threshold, so whenever the sound exceeds minus 20 decibels, gain reduction applies. The amount of gain reduction is determined by the ratio. So for example, if the audio was 10 decibels over the threshold, at a ratio of 2:1, it would reduce it by 5. So for every 2 decibels in over the threshold, only 1 decibel over the threshold comes out. So at 2:1, it's basically halving the amount of decibels that exceed the threshold. To give you an example of why it's so important to manage the amount of gain going into the compressor, I'm going to demonstrate how the compressor behaves at different gain levels. Okay, so as I play back the audio now, I'm going to adjust the gain, which is before the compressor in the chain, and we're going to see how it affects the behavior of the compressor. See, as I turn down the gain going in, the compressor basically stops working because the input, the amount of gain going in, is now underneath the threshold. If it's always underneath the threshold, the compressor does nothing. When the volume exceeds the threshold, then the compressor turns the signal down. That's what you're seeing here on the meter, the amount of gain reduction. Before, it was pumping it down to around -5, which meant it was turning down the signal by 5 dBs. Now, what I'm going to do now is, because I don't want so much gain reduction happening on my master, I want around 1 dB of gain reduction happening. I have 2 options. So I either increase the threshold so that the threshold is higher, so that the input has to be louder for compression to happen, or I just simply turn down input gain like I just did. However, I'm going to turn it back up again so that compression is happening, and then I'm going to make some final adjustments. So I've just turned up the input gain until the needle was pumping down to around 1 decibel of reduction. As a general guideline, that's what I recommend when in doubt, when in using the compressor in mastering. It gets a lot more noticeable after 1 decibel of gain reduction. However, what sounds good is good. My main motivation for using compression in mastering, when I do use compression in mastering, is sometimes just to glue the sound together a little bit, just to bring the peaks down ever so slightly, especially if I want that extra 1 dB of gain going into my limiter to increase the loudness. Okay, so let's talk about threshold again. So what I'm going to do is increase the gain going in once more. So again, increasing the gain means I've exceeded the threshold more, which means more gain reduction. But maybe I want that amount of gain. I just want to reduce the amount of gain reduction happening. So what I do is increase the threshold. By increasing the threshold, I've put the ceiling at which compression happens a bit higher in the scale. See, this compressor is quite good. I'm doing a good 3 dB of gain reduction on this master right now, and it's sounding really, really punchy. Now, the reason that it's sounding punchy is not necessarily because it's doing 3 dBs of gain reduction, but also because it has a nice open attack, which I'll come back to later in the video. From here, I might want to fine-tune the way that the compressor behaves by adjusting the ratio. So like I said before, at a 2-to-1 ratio, which is generally where I like to start, for every 2 dB over the threshold, it reduces it to 1 dB over the threshold. But I'm going to make some fine adjustments now, just using my ears, just to get to the sound that I want. So I just slightly turned down the ratio to about 1.6 to 1. It's just compressing less. So now only 1.6 dBs need to go over the threshold for 1 dB to just come out. And the closer I get to 1 to 1, the closer I get to 0 reduction or 0 compression. As you can see, when I bring the ratio all the way down to 1.0 to 1, that is no compression. At that ratio, nothing is happening because it says for every 1 dB over the threshold, 1 comes out. So that's no difference. So as you can see, there are already 3 things that determine the amount of gain reduction or the amount of compression that happens. That is input gain, which you can also adjust with Logic's built-in gain stage here. That's no different to using a gain stage before it. The only difference in this example is that there's an EQ between them because that's how I had it set up. But you can also decrease or increase gain at the beginning of the compressor there. The threshold is the level at which gain reduction starts to happen. The ratio is effectively how much relative gain reduction happens. And now we're going to move on to makeup gain. The purpose of makeup gain is for us to match the loudness of processed and unprocessed. The purpose of that is so that when we're comparing the signal with the compressor bypassed and the signal with the compressor unbypassed, our ears aren't fooled into believing that the one that is just louder is better. We use the makeup gain to match the loudness of the two when we're making that A-B comparison, so we can be objective about the way that the compressor is handling the sound. Generally, I like to turn off the auto gain so it's not doing it for me, so that I can adjust the makeup gain myself. As I suspected, with the compressor on, the signal is a little bit quieter, obviously because it's actually turning it down a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compensate for that with 1 dB, maybe 1.5 dB of makeup gain, so that when I'm toggling the bypass, when I'm making that A-B comparison, my ears feel like it's exactly the same loudness, and the only remaining difference is the sound that the compressor is making. Okay, so now I feel they are both the same loudness. The only difference I'm hearing now is that the compressed sound is just slightly more together. And simple as that, that is best practice for using makeup gain when using compression in mastering. In the next video, we're going to talk more about compression, more specifically about knee, attack, and release. Welcome back to part 2 of compression in mastering in Logic Pro. In the last video, we talked about input gain, threshold, ratio, and makeup gain. And now we're going to talk about knee, attack, and release. As I mentioned in the last video, in this example, even with quite heavy gain reduction, like 3 to 4 decibels, the sound was very, very punchy and quite transparent. And that's mostly due to the attack and release times that are set on this compressor setting. The attack is how quickly full gain reduction occurs. So when the threshold is exceeded by the signal, the attack is how quickly full gain reduction occurs. So for example, if the input crossed the threshold by 3 decibels and the attack time was set to 15 milliseconds, the attack time is how quickly it goes from 0 gain reduction to full gain reduction. More open attack times are generally quite good for preserving the transients, especially when you're mixing and you're trying to use compression to glue the drums together, for example. The attack time allows those transients to pass through whilst the compressor compresses the body of the sound. This also is very useful in mastering if you're trying to glue the body of the master together whilst allowing the transients to pass through mostly unaffected. The release time is how quickly or how slowly the gain reduction stops or goes to 0 gain reduction as the input reduces under the threshold. The release is practically how long it takes for compression to stop occurring after the input has fallen back under the threshold. Logic's compressor also has an auto release function, which attempts to make those release decisions for you. However, I quite like often to, especially with EDM music, to assign my own release time based on the general beat or the general rhythm of the sound that I'm mastering. Let me show you an example. See, the auto release right now is doing a very, very good job of bringing the reduction back up to 0 just in time for the next beat, just in time for the next kick drum to occur. If I were to do it without the auto release, I'll do it as follows. See how gain reduction returns to 0 a bit faster now when I bring it down to 5 milliseconds. However, now you see that as I really slow down the release to 5 full seconds, the needle is basically not returning to 0, because by the time that the compressor has triggered again, the release has only happened like a really, really tiny bit. So I like to bring it down to just about when the needle returns to 0 when I'm compressing a song like this in mastering. Now I'm going to finally adjust the attack time just so that it gives me just a right amount of punch whilst compressing just the right amount of body that I want it to. With a slightly reduced attack, that transient is coming through just a bit harder, a bit snappier, just like I wanted it to. The last thing I like to talk about in this part of the compression in Logic Pro 10 for mastering series is knee. So when I was talking about threshold before, the threshold is basically at what level does gain reduction start to occur? Or at least at what level and above does gain reduction start to occur? Knee basically widens the value at which gain reduction starts to occur. So instead of being like, oh, at -15 and above gain reduction occurs, and when it's below -15, no gain reduction occurs, the knee basically softens that curve. So with some knee, it slowly starts to happen below the threshold and fastens over the threshold. So with a knee at like 1 right now, the threshold is no longer at -17, even though it says it's at -17. It's actually a bit underneath -17, but it's not full gain reduction until it passes -17. So the knee kind of softens the point on the scale at which gain reduction starts to occur. Sometimes it's very difficult to hear the audible difference as a result to this, but I suggest that after you do all of the moves that I've already done, like adjusting the threshold, adjusting the ratio, attack and release, you just adjust the knee until you find a sweet spot in the sound somewhere. By bringing the knee back up to 0.5, I found that the sound is just a bit punchier than it was at 1, probably because compression started happening a lot further below the threshold at 1 than it does at 0.5. Thanks for watching, and in the next video, I'm going to talk about the different compressor models that are available to you in Logic Pro's compressor.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. If you'd like to continue learning with us, make sure you check out our mastering course with Logic Pro 10. Full price, this is $120, but if you check the link below, you can get this course for only $10. Thank you again for watching this video, and we'll talk to you soon.